This is the Less Insurance Dependence podcast show with my good friend Gary Takas and myself, Narain Arul Raja.
We appreciate your listenership, your time, and most of all, we appreciate your intention to reduce insurance dependence in your practice. Our goal is to provide information that will help you successfully reduce insurance dependence and convert your practice into a thriving and profitable dental practice that provides you with personal, professional, and financial satisfaction.
Welcome to another episode of the Less Insurance Dependence podcast, your trusted source for insights, strategies, and expert advice to help dental professionals take control of their practices and careers. I'm your co-host, Lester D. Alwis, and today we are diving into a topic that's top of mind for many practice owners: how today's insurance and legislative environment are affecting dental practice sales and valuations. Joining me is Ryan Mingus, Managing Director at Tusk Partners, one of the leading advisory firms for dental practice transitions, valuations, and M&A. With years of experience guiding dental professionals through complex sales and partnership processes, Ryan brings a unique perspective of how insurance dependence and regulatory changes are shaping practice values in today's market. Before we jump in, a quick message from our sponsors. Eco Marketing is offering a complimentary marketing strategy meeting. If you're ever wondering where your online visibility is at for your practice, their experts will show you how to attract high quality new patients on Google locally and grow your patient flow organically and sustainably. So if you ever want to have that health checkup for your online visibility, you can visit lessinsurancependence.com/marketing-strategy-meeting to book your complimentary session. If you're ready to take your practice to the next level, or if you're looking for mentorship, schedule a complimentary coaching strategy meeting with Gary Takas at thrivingdentist.com/CSM. Now let's get started. Ryan, we're excited to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Lester. Looking forward to it.
All right. So to kick things off, how is today's insurance environment influencing dental practice sales and valuations across the industry?
Well, it's certainly been an interesting time with federal budget cuts coming down at the federal level. Obviously, Medicaid is a state-run platform. However, many states rely on government subsidies, some states more than others. Looking at Illinois versus Indiana, two states right next to each other, two very different Medicaid programs within those particular states. So it varies widely from state to state. We're located here in North Carolina, and we were actually one of the earliest states to experience a cut, across the board cut in Medicaid reimbursements for dentistry as a result of some of the funding being taken away with respect to Medicaid. Mm-hmm. So it's a very tumultuous time. A lot of folks don't know what's going to happen. And we're trying to find answers, and they're trying to look around corners to see, what other states are doing so that they can kind of stack their state up against states that are actually taking action, so they can, learn from that and potentially look for ways to mitigate the impact to their practices.
All right. That's a great overview of the current market. Now, let's go a bit deeper. When evaluating a practice, what are the main financial and operational signs that insurance dependence may be lowering its overall value?
So from a Medicaid perspective, any buyer looking to acquire the business, whether it's a private buyer or a DSO type buyer, they're all looking at what the business is going to do, right? They're going to value the business based on and mostly focus on the trailing 12-month period or the trended last 3 years, depending on what the buyer, how they're assessing the practice. But if there is a known or a known likely landmine sitting out in front of them once they take ownership, they're going to account for that in the form of the valuation. So even if Medicaid cuts haven't happened in your state and it hasn't personally impacted your business, from a valuation perspective, I have to take that into account as a buyer when I'm looking at your business, because the buyer in my hand, or excuse me, the business in my hands might look very different than the business in your hands because the operating environment you had versus the operating environment I'm going to have. So it's 100% creating headwinds for sellers to get their deal done at maximum valuation. And it's also creating an environment where buyers are trying to account for that future risk in the structure of the deal. So whereas maybe they might have been able to give you a higher percentage of the offer or the purchase price in cash at close, they're now carving out dollars and setting that aside to come to you when and if certain revenue benchmarks are achieved. Or maybe it's just if certain legislation doesn't happen, then those dollars are released to you. But they're trying to find ways to mitigate the risk for them while also giving sellers an opportunity to reach, the valuation that they would have achieved if these cuts weren't coming into place. So that's on a Medicaid front. Not all practices accept Medicaid, but most do accept PPO policies. On that front, we're seeing, not necessarily those budget cuts come to fruition in the practice, but changes to ACA could likely impact how many people have dental insurance and how that might be implicated in your practice. Mm-hmm. So that's something that is out on the horizon that, again, is a landmine that they're going to try to navigate either through structure or by discounting the purchase price and use that as a reason why. Alternatively, with the tariffs, that's, again, it is legislation, but not, I guess. But it is impacting the valuation of businesses. So the tariffs legislation there, if you're a PPO heavy business, you can't control your reimbursement rates. You're contracted in, and as supplies go up and your supply expense goes up and labor expenses go up, you can't just raise your fees like a fee for service practice. And if I see that your profitability is trending downward for the last 2 years because of this higher inflationary environment, naturally the EBITDA that your business is valued on, and perhaps even the revenue that your business is valued on, is being affected. So, like, it's not just Medicaid businesses that are being impacted. The inflationary environment's heavily affecting PPO practices because they can't control their revenue and their expenses are going up. So that ultimately leaves sellers in a precarious situation. Do I sell now before it gets too bad? Or do I wait until this environment changes, or I'm able to renegotiate my insurance contracts and then go take my business out to market for sale?
Yeah, that's eye-opening. And we've had a lot of guests, they talk about the mindset shift when it comes to insurance. And with your expertise, you bring in this whole valuation side of the topic, which is very, very interesting to see and hear from you. And this is something very eye-opening. And now, as you know, legislation is always evolving. And I see recent legislation is it's expected to impact dentistry. Can you walk us through how these changes might affect practice profitability or transition readiness?
Well, I think we touched on how it's going to impact profitability, but just a quick recap is if you're a Medicaid-centric business or you have a large percentage of your revenue is Medicaid and you have active reimbursement being cut or pending reimbursement being cut, either you're directly impacted from the profitability perspective or revenue perspective because the cuts are already coming to fruition in your business, or they're looming, and depending on what state you're in, you have a higher or lower likelihood of them happening, and as such, a buyer is going to take that into account. And as much as knowledgeable as you can be on your business and how your state's going to be handling Medicaid, the more negotiating power you have when trying to push back on a buyer trying to, say that your business is worth less as a result of these pending cuts. From a PPO perspective, the tariff environment and just in general, the inflationary environment over the last 2 years, tariffs didn't come into effect until April 1st of 2025, but the inflationary environment was high before that. So wage inflation, expense inflation, that was all happening for a year and a half prior to tariffs, and then it just kind of got exacerbated with tariffs. So what's happening there from a profitability standpoint is, you guys that have heavy PPO businesses are not able to change your top line revenue number unless you're able to effectively negotiate contracts in a timely manner. But your ability to negotiate those and when they go into effect versus how fast inflation can hit your business, they're not one-to-one. So you might want to wait to go to market, and how it help, in terms of taking the conversation to how it can, these folks on the call can utilize this information, is you might want to time going to market to reflect if you're successful in negotiating higher insurance reimbursement. You might want to wait until that's maybe 6 months bearing out in your last 12 months. You don't need to wait a full year, because a good advisor will get you 1 year's credit on 4 to 6 months worth of data, because we can point to that contract and say, these other 6 months would look like this if these contracts were in place. So let's normalize the numbers in our client's favor and help the buyer come to terms with that adjustment. And then also from timing perspective, and then if you want to take a deep look at your business and determine if your current insurance mix is optimal for you, your patient base, your community in which you serve, and your goals in terms of what you're trying to achieve in a transaction.
Exactly. Now, for dentists who plan to sell or transition in the next few years, how can they strategically reduce insurance participation without hurting their patient base or short-term revenue?
I'll say very delicately. If you're a PPO-based business, like you've chosen to be a PPO-based business, and that is your marketing source for most of your practices, that is in fact a marketing expense choosing to be in there. So what you ultimately need to balance is on a by insurance company basis. You need to look at what your reimbursements are, how they compare and stack up to all of your other insurance companies. What is the percentage of revenue coming through your business, or the percentage of patients spread across each one of those insurance companies, and ultimately determine if you have any insurance companies that are more or less profitable, ones that you want to do more of, ones that you want to do less of, ones that you might want to completely cut ties with, so that maybe you can stay a PPO provider, but just maybe change your operational and sort of your new patient exam process, and try to get more patients in the door from the insurance companies that you have the greatest profitability from. And that way you don't have to completely cut ties with certain insurance companies, but you might elect to completely cut ties with certain insurance companies. And that's it's a pretty in-depth assessment.
Mm-hmm.
And there are certainly some professionals out there that do that and specialize in that. We don't, but that is ultimately what you need to do. You need to take a scalpel approach to the situation, because if you do start dropping insurance companies, you've now lost that portion of your new patient funnel, and you're going to have to replace that with other people with likely marketing dollars. If you can't replace that with another insurance company that you like and market more to that, or do more employee fairs or whatever it is to get more from one particular insurance company, you might have to backfill it with self-marketed patients, which then you need to assess how much that's going to cost you and what the net impact is relative to that insurance provider that you're debating cutting ties with.
Amazing. It's such a smart approach. And now, finally, what practical steps can practice owners take now to prepare financially and operationally for a smooth transition in the current market?
Well, I think ultimately if you're talking about Medicaid first, you need to be aware of what pending implications are. Some of these state websites are already listing out no change to 2026. We've already got the budget for keeping reimbursements the way they are. And if you can get that material, keep that on hand, formalize that letter or that announcement in some way, that's a good card to have in your hand when you're out there negotiating with buyers. That's what we're doing right now on all of our clients' deals that are in process of closing. We're going out to the websites. We're digging through each and every resource available to find out what the likely implications, if any, are in 2026, and even trying to get a look at 2027. So, for example, I'm dealing with a practice right now. We're trying to close next month.
Mm-hmm.
Buyer's bank was saying, hey, we just want to confirm that what we're seeing in the market from Medicaid with respect to implications in current in 25 and to be seen in 26. No change in 25, no change in 26 in this particular state. However, 2027, they're tilting their hand that there are going to be implications to the tune of a 4% cut across the board.
Oh.
And then, that's across the board. But if you're a pedocentric business, some states will prioritize pediatric over adult. So you want to be aware that how your state's going to treat any Medicaid cut to dentistry, because usually they cut adult Medicaid first and then pedo second. In North Carolina, they just did a carte blanche, everything. But what we were expecting to see was adult Medicaid cut, not pediatric, but we were wrong in our assumption. However, didn't materially impact our clients' business. But all these things, those are just a couple different examples of information that can be your friend and be really valuable. One, so you can prepare for those things in terms of what a buyer is going to say. And two, you can develop a plan so you can say, well, look, we're going to just drop Medicaid and we're going to backfill it with all these patients from these PPO plans. We really don't want to drop Medicaid. It's part of our philosophy, but like economically and viably, it just doesn't make sense right now. So you can materially change, the operations of your business and then go to that buyer and say, we've already accounted for this, so you can't discount us like what you're trying to discount our business. So Medicaid, there's a lot to unpack there, probably enough for, one-on-one calls where we can talk to individuals and assess what they're dealing with and ultimately what they want to achieve. From a PPO perspective, I think if you haven't already over the past 2 years, given the inflationary environment, been digging deep on your current insurance by payer rather, profitability, and making sure that you're comfortable with the mix you have, then you're way behind the times, honestly. And you need to be doing that yesterday, because inflation doesn't appear to be going away. We're hovering at 3% growth a year, in every single iteration that we've been looking at it on a monthly basis. We want it to be at 2. That's a hefty drop. That's a 30% reduction in the inflationary growth rate. That's not something that can be done overnight. So you need to prepare yourself for that and start to determine if you need to cut ties with certain insurance companies or do things operationally to get more of particular insurance companies in your payer mix to offset this environment. And then additionally, you need to be negotiating, if you haven't already, you need to be looking for larger resources other than yourself to see if there are some groups that are out there collectively in your state's ADA that are going to these insurance companies and advocating. You want to be on that team. You want to be in those conversations, and you want to be first in line when those reimbursement rates change if you're successful, because that will also play into valuation. And again, you don't need to see these things play out a full 12 months to get benefit from it. Simply negotiating a favorable increase in your contracts and your reimbursement rates, that will have an immediate impact on the valuation, because as your advisor, I can re-rack all of your financials to reflect what your business would have looked like with each and every one of those incremental increases in reimbursement.
Amazing advice. And just like you said, like none of this is happening like overnight. You got to keep planning and you got to keep thinking about your next phase, next step to take. I mean, when you are in this approach of your reducing insurance dependence. Now, if anyone listening in, if they want to basically take action, this podcast is all about taking action. Tell us, the listeners, how can they reach out to you?
So directly to me in order to like get our lay of the land and give you real world examples of what we're facing with our clients that are in market and feedback we're hearing from buyers. We aren't a consulting resource for you with respect to like contracting with payers or renegotiating things like that, but we can give people very real, tangible examples of businesses just like theirs and what we're experiencing in market. And those stories hopefully will help them navigate their own environment. Also, we can put people in touch with some trusted resources depending on what they need. We do one thing and one thing only, which is take people to market. But what we do first and foremost is give people an honest read of the valuation of their business today based on current market dynamics. So reach out to info@tuskpracticesales.com or Ryan@tuskpracticesales.com as well. And you can find me on LinkedIn or what have you. But our website has a plethora of ways to contact us and forms to fill out depending on what you're looking to learn about. And we can put you in touch with the right person. If it's not me, it might be somebody else on our team. But yeah, we love talking with doctors. We have usually multi-year relationships with folks before they ever decide to go to market. Once we teach people how their business is viewed in the eyes of the buy side, they generally see an opportunity to make meaningful improvements in their business over a 6-month to 24-month period before they elect to go to market. And in this environment, like with so many near-term issues, I think a lot of buyers have paralysis about the idea of, sellers have a lot of paralysis about the idea of taking their business to market because there are just so many landmines to navigate. But we can mitigate a lot of those. And we are mitigating a lot of those in real time.
Exactly. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your expert perspective on how insurance trends and legislation are shaping the future of dental practice transitions.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Lester.
Key takeaway. So the key takeaway from this insurance dependence podcast is basically insurance dependence doesn't just impact daily operations. It directly affects a practice's value, transition readiness, and long-term financial freedom. Understanding these connections early allows practice owners to make smarter, more strategic decisions about their future. As always, this podcast is about taking action. First off, if you are looking to do a health checkup for your online visibility on Google, schedule your complimentary marketing strategy meeting with Echo Marketing at lessinsurancedependence.com/marketing strategy meeting. Our team will analyze your website and your online presence and give you a roadmap on how you can attract the right patients and strengthen your fee for service base. And secondly, if you're looking for mentorship, book a complimentary coaching strategy meeting with Gary Takas at thrivingdentist.com/CSM for personal guidance on building a thriving independent practice. Thank you for spending your time with us today, and thank you again, Ryan, for being part of this episode. Until next time, keep moving forward a thriving independent practice.